My ex-wife sued me for child support until a DNA test exposed the truth. Before we begin the story, make sure to subscribe to our channel and never miss more incredible stories every day. My ex-wife smirked at the mediator across the polished oak table, demanding my last dime, completely unaware of the DNA results burning a hole in my briefcase. My name is Mark. I'm 32 years old, and for the last 4 years, my entire universe has revolved around a little boy named Leo. He has a mop of curly brown hair, a laugh that can cure any bad day, and an absolute obsession with dinosaurs that rivals any paleontologist. I work as a mid-level logistics manager at a shipping company. It's not a glamorous job, but it pays the bills, or at least it used to before the divorce. Sarah, my 31-year-old ex-wife, took practically everything when she left me 2 years ago. We share 50-50 custody on paper, but the financial reality is heavily, punishingly skewed. Because she sacrificed her career potential during our brief marriage, a claim that is completely laughable to anyone who actually knows her. I pay a sickening amount in child support. Every single month, a massive chunk of my hard-earned paycheck vanishes directly into her bank account. I live in a cramped, drafty one-bedroom apartment where the heater barely works, sleeping on a lumpy pull-out couch in the living room just so Leo can have the actual bedroom when he stays with me. Meanwhile, Sarah lives in a lavish 4-bedroom house in the upscale suburbs, driving a pristine luxury SUV and taking regular weekend trips to expensive spas. I swallowed my pride and accepted this absolutely miserable arrangement for one simple, undeniable reason: Leo. I would gladly live in a literal cardboard box if it meant I got to see him smile every week. He is my son, my family, my reason for waking up at 5 in the morning to grind through another grueling day. But today, sitting in this stuffy, suffocating legal room while Sarah plays the ultimate victim, the stakes have never been higher. She's trying to squeeze me for even more cash, using my desperate love for my child as a weapon to completely destroy my life. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement radiating from her perfect posture makes my blood physically boil, but I force myself to keep my expression completely blank. I just let her talk, letting her spin her intricate web of lies, knowing exactly what I have. She was about to learn that my endless patience had finally run completely dry today. Our marriage didn't implode overnight. It was a slow, agonizing death by 1,000 paper cuts. Sarah and I met in our late 20s. She was charming, vibrant, and worked in marketing for a massive corporate firm. I fell for her hard, but the cracks started showing shortly after Leo was born. Sarah was always deeply obsessed with appearances. She wanted the designer clothes, the country club memberships, and the Instagram-perfect vacations that my logistics salary simply couldn't provide. She grew increasingly resentful of my practical, blue-collar lifestyle, constantly reminding me that her boss, Greg, took his family to Aspen while we were stuck going to state parks. The verbal abuse became a daily routine. Nothing I did was ever enough. When she finally filed for divorce, her lawyer was absolutely ruthless. Sarah played the role of the overwhelmed, abandoned mother to absolute perfection, weeping in court about how my long hours at the warehouse constituted neglect, even though I was working overtime strictly to pay off her mounting credit card debts. To avoid a drawn-out legal battle that would drain whatever small savings I had left, I caved. I gave her the beautiful house we had saved for years to buy. I gave her the primary vehicle. I took on a horrifying amount of our shared debt. I did it all because she threatened to fight for full, exclusive custody of Leo if I didn't comply with every single one of her demands. I just couldn't risk losing my little boy. So, I signed the papers, moved into my dingy little apartment, and began paying her an extortionate $2,400 a month in child support and alimony. I thought the nightmare was finally over. I thought we had reached a miserable but stable equilibrium where I could just focus on being a good, present dad during my weeks with Leo. For 2 years, I endured her snide comments at every single drop-off and pick-up. I ignored the designer clothes she wore while claiming poverty to the court. I kept my head down, lived on ramen noodles and cheap coffee, and focused entirely on my son's happiness. I convinced myself that the crushing financial burden was simply the heavy price of fatherhood, a sacrifice I was more than willing to make. I honestly believed the worst of her cruelty was finally a thing of the past. Then, out of absolutely nowhere, The process server knocked on my apartment door on a rainy Tuesday evening. I was right in the middle of making macaroni and cheese for Leo, who was happily watching cartoons on the couch. I opened the door, took the thick manila envelope, and felt my stomach instantly drop to the floor. Sarah was dragging me back to family court. As I read through the dense legal documents after putting Leo to sleep, my hands physically shook with rage. She was petitioning for a massive, completely unjustified increase in child support. Her completely fabricated reasoning? She claimed Leo suddenly had new, exorbitant educational and extracurricular needs that required private tutoring, elite swimming lessons, and a specialized organic diet. It was a masterclass in legal fiction. But the worst part was the personal attacks buried in the affidavit. She deliberately mocked my career trajectory, stating that my stagnant income and lack of professional ambition were actively detrimental to our son's future. She demanded my monthly payments be bumped up to $3,800. I stared at the number, doing the math in my head. If the judge actually granted this absurd request, I wouldn't just be broke, I would be entirely homeless. I wouldn't be able to afford rent, let alone food or electricity. I immediately texted her, "Sarah, what is this? You know I can't afford $3,800. You're going to put me on the street." Her reply came back less than 2 minutes later, cold and entirely devoid of empathy. "You should have thought about that before deciding to be a warehouse loser for the rest of your life. Get a second job, Mark. Leo deserves better than your excuses." I sat in the dark living room, staring at the glowing screen of my phone. She wasn't just trying to get more money. She was actively trying to break me, to completely ruin me until there was absolutely nothing left. She wanted to punish me for simply existing in her perfect world. I felt like a drowning man with concrete tied to his ankles, sinking deeper into a dark, suffocating abyss of debt and despair. I spent the entire night pacing the small floor, frantically searching for any possible legal loophole to save myself. Little did I know, the universe was about to hand me the ultimate, devastating weapon. The catalyst for the explosion wasn't a dramatic confrontation, but a frightening, mundane Tuesday afternoon. Leo was at my apartment when he suddenly developed a severe, blistering rash all over his arms and chest, accompanied by a dangerously high fever. Panicking, I rushed him to the nearest urgent care clinic. The chaotic waiting room was packed, but they took him back quickly because of his temperature. The attending physician, a kind older man with glasses, ordered a comprehensive panel of blood tests to rule out any severe infections or allergic reactions. I sat by Leo's hospital bed, holding his tiny, burning hand, whispering that everything was going to be completely okay. After 2 agonizing hours, the doctor finally returned with a clipboard. He assured me that it was just a severe viral rash and prescribed a heavy course of antibiotics. The relief washing over me was absolutely immense. But then, as he was casually flipping through the lab results to print my discharge papers, he paused. "Interesting," he mumbled, mostly to himself. "Leo is an AB negative blood type. That's quite rare." I frowned, my exhausted brain trying to process the information. "AB negative? Are you sure?" The doctor nodded, tapping the paper. "Yes, it's right here. Both parents must carry the rare genetic markers." I sat there, frozen. I am O positive. I know this for an absolute fact because I am a regular blood donor. And I clearly remembered Sarah complaining about her own blood type during her pregnancy. She is strictly O negative. I am no geneticist, but basic high school biology immediately came rushing back to my mind. 2 type O parents can only produce a type O child. It is a biological, undeniable impossibility for an O positive man and an O negative woman to create an AB negative baby. The sterile walls of the room suddenly felt like they were rapidly closing in. The bright fluorescent lights hummed loudly in my ears. I looked down at Leo, who was sleeping peacefully. My son, my entire world, my everything. The doctor looked at my pale face, his expression suddenly shifting from professional to a quiet, uncomfortable realization. He cleared his throat, handed me the papers, and practically fled the small room. The silence in the room was deafening as a horrifying suspicion began to take root. I spent the entire drive home trying desperately to explain away the massive biological discrepancy. I mentally grasped at any possible logical straw I could find to preserve my reality. Medical errors happen all the time, right? Labs mix up blood samples. Nurses mislabel vials in chaotic emergency rooms. It had to be a stupid clerical mistake. It just had to be. When we finally got back to my apartment, I tucked an exhausted Leo into my bed, gave him his prescribed medication, and retreated to the kitchen. But the relentless paranoia was already sinking its venomous teeth deeply into my brain. How do you look at a child you raised, a child you fiercely love with your whole soul, and realize he might share the blood of a complete stranger? I opened my laptop and started frantically researching blood type genetics, scrolling through endless medical journals and paternity forums. Every single website, every single chart, confirmed the exact same terrifying truth. An O-positive father and an O-negative mother simply cannot have an AB-negative child. Zero exceptions. As I stared blankly at the glowing screen, dark, suppressed memories from the year Leo was conceived began bubbling aggressively to the surface of my mind. I vividly remembered Sarah's sudden, unexplained late nights at the marketing firm. I recalled the sudden business trips she took with her wealthy, arrogant boss, Greg. I remembered how incredibly protective she became of her phone, changing her passcode, and taking calls in the bathroom with the shower running. I had blindly trusted her back then, completely writing it off as work stress because I was so desperately in love. I felt physically sick, my stomach churning with a mixture of profound dread and rising fury. I couldn't live in this agonizing state of limbo, completely tortured by a suspicion that could destroy my entire universe. Shaking violently, I opened a new browser tab, navigated to a private genetic testing laboratory's website, and paid extra for expedited, discreet shipping. I ordered a stealth, at-home DNA paternity kit to be delivered immediately. I used a secondary credit card that Sarah didn't know about, ensuring she wouldn't see the charge. The countdown to the absolute destruction of my reality had officially and irreversibly begun tonight. The next 5 days were an absolute, unmitigated psychological torture chamber. The discreet DNA kit arrived in a plain brown box. I carefully swabbed Leo's cheek while he watched a cartoon, telling him it was a medicine test for his rash. Then, I swabbed my own cheek, sealed the vials in the prepaid envelope, and practically sprinted to the post office to overnight it to the laboratory. And then, I simply had to wait. I couldn't eat. I couldn't sleep. Every time I looked at Leo's face, I found myself frantically searching for my own features in his small nose, his jawline, the shape of his eyes. The guilt of even questioning his paternity was eating me alive, tearing at my soul. But the gnawing, pervasive doubt was significantly worse. To add immense insult to this psychological injury, Sarah's relentless harassment reached an entirely new, vicious level during this waiting period. She bombarded my phone with a constant stream of mocking, aggressive text messages regarding our rapidly approaching court date. "I hope you're packing your bags for a smaller apartment," she texted on Thursday afternoon. "My lawyer is going to absolutely obliterate you on the 14th. You're pathetic." On Friday, she sent a screenshot of a luxury vacation rental in Hawaii, accompanied by the text, "Leo and I are going to have a fantastic summer, thanks to your new support payments. Make sure your bank account is fully ready." It took every single ounce of my self-control, every shred of my willpower, not to reply and scream about the blood test. I had to remain entirely stoic. I couldn't tip my hand, not when I didn't have the concrete, undeniable proof yet. I sat at my desk at the warehouse, staring blankly at shipping manifests while my phone constantly buzzed with her toxic venom. I felt like a tightly wound spring, completely ready to violently snap at any given moment. I was trapped in a suffocating purgatory, constantly oscillating between desperate hope and horrifying realization. I desperately prayed the laboratory would prove my horrifying suspicions entirely wrong. Then, on a bleak Monday morning, the fateful notification finally chimed on my frozen screen. The subject line simply read, "Confidential laboratory results, case number 84729. I was sitting at my tiny kitchen table, a half-empty mug of stale coffee resting in front of me. The apartment was entirely silent. Leo was back at Sarah's house for the week. My fingers literally trembled as I moved the computer mouse and clicked on the encrypted PDF attachment. I had to type in a special passcode to unlock the document. The file slowly loaded on my screen, revealing pages of dense, complicated genetic markers and confusing scientific jargon. I desperately scrolled past the graphs, my eyes frantically searching for the final, definitive conclusion at the very bottom of the document. And then, there it was, printed in stark, unforgiving black text. Probability of paternity, 0%. The narrator is conclusively excluded as the biological father of the tested child. I stared at those cold, mathematical zeros for what felt like an absolute eternity. 0%. It wasn't a low probability. It was an absolute, undeniable negative. I couldn't breathe. It felt as though a massive, invisible semi-truck had crashed directly through my living room wall and violently slammed into my chest. A strange, guttural noise escaped my throat, a sound I didn't even recognize as my own voice. I pushed violently away from the table, knocking the coffee mug onto the floor, where it shattered into dozens of sharp pieces. I fell entirely to my knees among the broken ceramic and dark liquid, completely shattering right along with it. The agonizing heartbreak was absolute and entirely all-consuming. Every single memory I had of the last 4 years, the late-night feedings, the incredibly joyful first steps, the endless bedtime stories, the overwhelming love I felt for this innocent little boy, was suddenly tainted by a massive, grotesque lie. I had spent years completely sacrificing my financial stability, my personal happiness, and my entire future to provide for a child that wasn't even mine. Sarah had known. She had looked me perfectly in the eyes for years and lied. The sheer magnitude of her profound betrayal wrapped around my neck like a suffocating python. As the raw grief slowly subsided, a terrifying, icy anger began replacing my broken heart. If I wasn't the father, who the hell was? I wiped the tears from my burning face and sat back down at my computer, fueled by an entirely new, terrifying energy. I was no longer just a broken, financially drained father. I was a man actively hunting for the truth. I dug a dusty, old external hard drive out of my closet, the one we used to back up our shared household computers during the marriage. It contained thousands of old files, financial spreadsheets, and archived emails. I also logged into my cellular provider's website, pulling up detailed, itemized phone records from exactly 5 years ago, the precise time frame when Leo was miraculously conceived. It was a tedious, agonizing digital excavation. I spent hours meticulously cross-referencing dates, searching for any unusual patterns or discrepancies. Then, I finally found the smoking gun hidden in plain sight. During the exact month of Leo's conception, Sarah had sent an astonishing 482 text messages and made dozens of late-night phone calls to a single, unlisted number. I ran a quick reverse lookup on the number through a paid online directory. The result made my blood run entirely cold. It belonged to Greg, her incredibly wealthy, incredibly arrogant boss at the marketing firm. The same man she constantly compared me to, whose expensive vacations she threw in my face. I dug deeper into the archived emails on the hard drive and found a deeply hidden folder labeled Client Notes. Inside were dozens of explicit, undeniable email exchanges between Sarah and Greg. They detailed secretive hotel meetups, lavish dinners, and a completely hidden romance that had been going on long before we even got married. She hadn't just made a one-time mistake. She had maintained an intricate, long-term double life right beneath my nose. I stared at the screen, physically sickened by the profound, calculating level of her absolute deception. She used my profound love as a convenient shield. She needed a stable, clueless husband to maintain her perfect public image while she played around. The full, horrifying scope of her monstrous financial parasitism was finally becoming completely, agonizingly clear. The pieces of the sickening puzzle finally locked perfectly together, painting a portrait of absolute, unadulterated greed. Sarah hadn't just cheated on me. She had systematically orchestrated a massive financial fraud to entirely subsidize her secret life. Reading through the timelines of her emails with Greg, I realized the horrifying truth about our marriage. Greg was incredibly wealthy, but he was also married and completely unwilling to leave his wife for a subordinate. Sarah, desperate to keep him in her life, but needing a reliable financial safety net, chose me to play the role of the useful idiot. I was the reliable, hardworking guy who would blindly pay the mortgage, buy the groceries, and provide the boring stability she needed while she enjoyed the thrilling, high-roller lifestyle with her boss. When she got pregnant, she panicked, pinned it completely on me, and I swallowed the lie without a single question. But the absolute worst part was the divorce. When Greg eventually broke things off temporarily, she decided to fully cash out her investment in me. She destroyed our marriage, took the house, and locked me into paying thousands of dollars in exorbitant child support every single month. And what did she do with that money? I cross-referenced my bank statements with her social media timeline. While I was practically starving in a freezing apartment eating stale bread, my money was funding her luxurious spa days, her expensive designer handbags, and her fancy dinners out. She was literally milking my meager warehouse salary to maintain the wealthy illusion she had created while sleeping with Greg. The sheer, unfathomable audacity of her greed made me violently nauseous. She weaponized an innocent child to systematically siphon every single dollar I earned. I printed out every single email, every phone record, and the DNA test results, placing them into a thick manila folder. I had enough explosive evidence to not only ruin her case, but to destroy her completely. I desperately wanted to confront her right then, but I knew I needed professional firepower. First thing the next morning, I took my thick folder of explosive evidence straight to Diane, the sharpest, most ruthless family law attorney in the city. She was a no-nonsense woman in her late 40s, known for absolutely destroying fraudulent spouses in the courtroom. I sat in her pristine, glass-walled office and laid everything out on her desk. The AB-negative blood test, the devastating 0% DNA paternity results, and the thick stack of printed emails proving Sarah's long-term affair with Greg. Diane silently read through the documents, her perfectly arched eyebrows slowly rising higher and higher with every single page she turned. When she finally finished, she took off her reading glasses and looked at me with a dangerous, predatory smile. "Mark," she said, her voice completely calm but laced with venom. "This isn't just infidelity. This is massive, calculated financial fraud." I told her I wanted to drive straight to Sarah's house, throw the papers in her face, and demand my money back immediately. I was so blinded by absolute rage that I couldn't think straight. But Diane firmly held up her hand, stopping me dead in my tracks. "Absolutely not," she commanded. "If you confront her now, she will panic, hire emergency damage control, and find a way to spin this. She might even try to flee or hide assets. We do not warn the enemy when we have a nuclear bomb." Diane outlined a brilliant, utterly ruthless legal strategy. We were going to keep our mouths completely shut. We were going to let Sarah walk directly into the upcoming court-ordered mediation session, completely confident that she was holding all the cards. We would let her officially perjure herself on the legal record by swearing that I was the biological father and demanding more money. Only then, when she was entirely trapped by her own recorded lies, would we strike. It was a brutal plan, requiring me to act completely defeated, but I trusted Diane's brilliant mind. The agonizing countdown to the official mediation day felt like walking directly toward a waiting guillotine. The day of the mediation finally arrived, heavy with suffocating tension. We met in a sterile, neutral conference room downtown, complete with a massive oak table and a court-appointed mediator sitting at the head. Sarah walked in wearing a pristine designer suit, flanked by her smug, incredibly expensive lawyer. She didn't even look at me, projecting an aura of absolute, untouchable arrogance. Diane sat calmly beside me, her expression entirely unreadable. I played my assigned role to absolute perfection. I slumped my shoulders, stared desperately at my hands, and made my voice tremble just slightly. I looked exactly like the broken, completely defeated man Sarah believed me to be. The mediator started the session by asking Sarah to officially state her demands for the formal legal record. Sarah eagerly leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with pure greed. She went on a 10-minute tirade, officially recorded by the stenographer, detailing how I was the sole biological father, how I was financially neglecting my duties, and how she desperately needed $3,800 a month to provide for our child's escalating needs. "Mark is the father," she stated firmly, looking directly at the mediator. "He has a legal and moral obligation to fully support his biological son, regardless of his own personal financial failures." Diane let her speak, offering no immediate objections. She gently nudged my arm under the table, a silent command to hold my nerve. The mediator then turned to us, asking if we were willing to accept the newly proposed terms or if we needed to proceed to a full trial. Sarah smirked across the table, completely convinced she had successfully backed me into a dark, inescapable corner. She actually believed I was going to cave right there and sign my entire life away. I slowly lifted my head, making direct eye contact with her for the very first time. My supposed fear was completely gone, replaced entirely by a cold, calculating, and terrifying calm. I reached slowly into my leather briefcase, my fingers tightly gripping the thick manila envelope. Once Sarah's fraudulent statements were permanently locked into the official legal transcript, Diane smoothly took absolute control of the room. "Before we discuss any financial adjustments," Diane announced, her voice echoing sharply off the sterile walls, "my client has discovered some new, highly relevant evidence regarding the fundamental basis of this entire support arrangement." Sarah's smug lawyer rolled his eyes, clearly expecting us to argue over grocery bills or warehouse overtime pay. Diane didn't even blink. She calmly reached over, took the thick envelope from my hands, and pulled out 3 carefully organized stacks of paper. She slid the first stack directly across the polished oak table. "This," Diane stated with icy precision, "is an official genetic test from an accredited medical laboratory. It conclusively proves, with 0.0% probability, that Mark is not the biological father of the child in question." The entire room instantly froze. The mediator gasped audibly. Sarah's face drained of every single drop of color, transforming into a horrifying mask of pure, unadulterated panic. Before her stunned lawyer could even formulate an objection, Diane aggressively slid the second stack of papers forward. "And these," she continued relentlessly, "are the printed, time-stamped emails and phone records conclusively proving that Mrs. Sarah maintained a continuous, physical affair with her employer, Greg, during the exact window of conception." Sarah physically recoiled, her hands violently trembling as she stared at the undeniable proof of her secret double life completely exposed under the harsh fluorescent lights. Her lawyer desperately tried to snatch the papers away, stuttering about admissibility, but Diane was a completely unstoppable force. She looked directly at Sarah, her voice dropping to a terrifying, deadly whisper. "You just officially perjured yourself on the legal record to commit massive financial extortion." The trap had brutally snapped entirely shut. There was absolutely no escape from the devastating avalanche of undeniable, catastrophic truth we unleashed. The suffocating silence was finally broken by a horrifying, high-pitched noise escaping from Sarah's throat. Sarah completely and totally unraveled right there in the conference chair. The sophisticated, untouchable facade she had meticulously maintained for years shattered into a million pathetic pieces. She started hyperventilating, tears rapidly streaming down her pale face, ruining her perfect makeup. "It's a mistake," she shrieked hysterically, her voice echoing loudly in the small room. The lab lied. "Mark, you tampered with the test because you're a cheap, selfish loser." Her frantic attempts to deflect blame only made her look infinitely more guilty. The mediator, an older woman who had seen decades of family disputes, looked at Sarah with pure, unmasked disgust. Sarah's own lawyer quietly packed his expensive briefcase, leaned over, and whispered that he could no longer represent her due to her blatant perjury. He literally abandoned her on the spot. Diane immediately requested that the mediation be suspended and demanded an emergency hearing before the actual family court judge. When we stood before the judge 3 days later, the scene was an absolute bloodbath. The judge reviewed the DNA results and the digital communication logs with mounting, visible fury. Sarah stood alone, weeping uncontrollably, begging for mercy she absolutely didn't deserve. The judge was completely merciless. He immediately vacated the existing child support order, completely freeing me from the crushing financial chains she had forged. But Diane wasn't completely finished. We formally filed a massive civil lawsuit against Sarah for severe paternity fraud, demanding full financial restitution for every single dollar of child support I had paid over the last 4 years. The judge completely agreed, placing a massive legal lien on her beautiful suburban house to ensure I would be entirely repaid. The empire built on my stolen money was burning to the absolute ground. She was completely trapped, facing total financial ruin and the total destruction of her reputation. But the true, devastating collateral damage of this entire nightmare was still waiting for me. The public fallout from the courtroom explosion was spectacularly swift and absolutely brutal. Word of the severe paternity fraud quickly reached Sarah's marketing firm. Greg, desperate to save his own marriage and shield his lucrative career from the massive scandal, immediately threw Sarah completely under the bus. He fired her from the company, completely denied knowing anything about the child's true paternity, and promptly blocked her number. Suddenly unemployed, entirely disgraced, and facing a massive court-ordered restitution debt to me, Sarah was forced to immediately list her lavish suburban house for sale. The luxury SUV was repossessed by the bank within weeks. She was completely ruined, entirely by her own malicious, greedy hand. But my ultimate victory felt incredibly hollow, completely overshadowed by the massive, heartbreaking dilemma regarding Leo. He was completely innocent in this horrifying mess. He didn't ask to be born into a massive web of deceit, and he certainly didn't know that the man he called Daddy didn't share a single drop of his DNA. Making the excruciating choice about our future relationship was the hardest thing I have ever done. After agonizing weeks of intense therapy and deep soul-searching, I made a very firm decision. I legally formally relinquished my parental rights to completely sever any financial ties or obligations to Sarah. However, I hired Diane to negotiate a very specific, legally binding visitation agreement. I was no longer his biological or legal father on paper, but I refused to completely abandon the innocent little boy I had raised from birth. I would still see him, still take him to the park, and still buy him his favorite plastic dinosaurs, but entirely on my own fiercely protected terms. I absolutely refused to let Sarah's profound evil destroy the genuine love I had built. I would be a deeply loving presence in his life, but I would never be her victim again. The incredibly long, difficult journey toward genuine healing was finally, slowly beginning for both of us. It has been 14 entirely exhausting months since that fateful mediation day completely changed my reality. My life looks vastly different now. Without the crushing, suffocating weight of Sarah's fraudulent child support payments, I was finally able to dig myself out of massive debt. I moved out of that dingy, freezing apartment and recently purchased a small, comfortable 2-bedroom house with a nice, fenced-in backyard. It's nothing lavish, but it is entirely mine, built honestly on my own hard work. The spare bedroom is decorated with dinosaurs, waiting for Leo's weekend visits. Looking back on the absolute nightmare, my perspective on fatherhood has entirely shifted. I learned the incredibly hard way that true family isn't solely defined by genetic markers or matching blood types in a sterile laboratory. Fatherhood is entirely about the time, the overwhelming love, and the deep emotional bonds you actively choose to build every single day. I am not Leo's biological creator, but I am the incredibly proud man who taught him how to walk, and no court or malicious ex-wife can ever erase that truth. Surviving such profound, absolute betrayal fundamentally broke me, but it also forced me to rebuild myself into a much stronger, entirely unyielding person. If there is one crucial, practical piece of advice I can offer to any man facing a sudden, hostile divorce or inexplicably skyrocketing support demands, it is this: demand a legal DNA test immediately. Do not ever let guilt, shame, or emotional manipulation prevent you from entirely verifying the scientific truth. Trust your gut instincts, hire a completely ruthless lawyer like Diane, and absolutely know your legal rights. You deserve undeniable truth, and you completely deserve to protect your own future. I look out my window today, watching the bright sunshine hit the green grass of my new yard. I survived the absolute worst storm imaginable, and the future finally looks incredibly bright today.